Hired to work on a cruise ship, Maid is shocked to see Millionaire, who was her husband presumed dead for 9 years. She approached and, "Hello, welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications." Anna had never felt happier. The news of her pregnancy had transformed her peaceful life in the best way possible. Twins? She and John had always talked about starting a family, but this exceeded all their dreams. Sitting in her cozy living room, Anna watched John's eyes light up as she told him the news. His face was a mix of disbelief and pure joy. "Twins?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion as he ran a hand through his thick, dark hair. "Are we really having twins?" She nodded, her smile so wide it made her cheeks hurt. "Yes, can you believe it?" John hugged her tightly, his breathing shaky with excitement. "I can't believe it, Anna. This is everything, everything." They felt like they were on top of the world. Their simple, small life felt perfect. They lived in a modest house in the suburbs, nothing fancy, but it was theirs. Both worked hard, and though they weren't wealthy, they had each other. And now they had the future they'd always dreamed of, a family. Over the next week, they were immersed in baby names, nursery designs, and planning their new life. John joked about learning to change 2 diapers at once, while Anna made lists of baby clothes and essentials. They had no idea how they would afford everything, but that didn't matter. They were happy. And then, as quickly as the joy arrived, it faded. The call came late one night, just as the sun had set on the horizon, casting a golden glow in the living room. John had gone out to run some errands, picking up a few things for dinner, and Anna had stayed home, her hand idly resting on her still flat belly. She had been thinking about the future, imagining the twins running around the garden, when the phone rang. It was strange. John should have been home by now. "Hello," she answered, her voice calm, unaware of the storm about to break. "Mrs. Martinez?" The voice on the other end was official, distant. "Yes, it's me. Who's calling?" There was a pause long enough for Anna's heart to plummet. "I'm calling about your husband, John Martinez." The words made no sense at first. Accident? John? Her mind couldn't connect the dots. He had just gone out to buy groceries. How could there have been an accident? But the voice continued, filling the silence with details she didn't want to hear. "His car went off the road. We've searched the area, but haven't been able to recover his body." For a moment, everything stopped. The room seemed to close in on her, and her breath caught in her throat. "No, this couldn't be happening. It just couldn't be." "No, I don't understand," Anna stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean you can't find him?" The voice softened slightly, but the words were no less brutal. "We believe the current might have carried the car into the river. It's likely that the body was swept away." Anna's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, clutching the phone as if it were her only lifeline. John, gone, just like that. Her mind screamed that it couldn't be true. There must be a mistake. But the official, somber tone on the other end told her otherwise. The days that followed were a blur. There was no closure, no body to bury, nothing to confirm what had happened beyond the words of strangers and the empty space in her life where John used to be. Friends and family tried to console her, but no words could fill the void. He was gone, and all that remained was the suffocating silence of her once joyful home. And then, just when Anna thought things couldn't get worse, they did. It started with a knock at the door. She opened it to find a man she didn't recognize, his expression stern and impatient. "Mrs. Martinez?" he asked, though it was clear he already knew the answer.
"Yes."
"I'm here to collect the debt your husband owed." "Debt?" Anna frowned. "I don't understand. What debt?" The man's lips twisted into a humorless smile. "Your husband owed a significant amount to some not very understanding lenders, and now, as he's not here to pay it, that responsibility falls to you." Her blood froze. John had never mentioned any debts. They weren't rich, but they had always gotten by. How could this be possible? "I don't have any money," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. The man's smile did not waver. "That's not my problem. You'll find a way, or else." And with that, he turned and left, leaving Anna standing in the doorway, stunned and terrified. The weight of the world seemed to crush her from all sides. She was pregnant, alone, and now saddled with a debt she had no way to pay. The life she and John had dreamed of together had vanished, replaced by a nightmare from which she could not escape. As the days passed, Anna tried to stay strong for the sake of her unborn children, but with each passing moment, the reality of her situation became harder to ignore. She was alone, and the world was closing in on her. In the months that followed, Anna's life became a relentless cycle of fear and exhaustion. The joy she once felt at the idea of becoming a mother was clouded by the crushing weight of the debt John had left behind. She had no idea how deep it was, and now, with each week that passed, it became painfully clear she was in a dead end. The phone call started first. Anonymous, cold voices reminded her of the money she owed. Every time the phone rang, her heart raced, panic washing over her until she gathered the courage to answer. Each conversation was the same. Threatening, impatient demands for payments she couldn't make. Anna tried to explain, over and over, that she didn't have the money. "I'm pregnant," she would say, hoping for some glimmer of compassion. "My husband is gone, and I'm doing the best I can." But her words fell on deaf ears. To them, she was just another debtor, another name on a list, and each time she hung up, her situation felt even more impossible. The pressure from the lenders was relentless. When calls didn't scare her enough, they escalated. Men began to show up at her door without warning. She would open it cautiously, only to be met with cold stares and direct reminders of the debt. Their presence was suffocating, as if they were waiting for her to break. "You have 1 month," one of them told her after handing her a paper. "Get the money, or we'll make sure you pay in other ways." Anna looked at the paper in disbelief. The amount owed was far more than she could have imagined. It felt like she was drowning in an ocean with no way out, each wave taller and more ruthless than the last. Each time she thought she could catch a breath, the reality of her financial situation hit her even harder. Desperate, she took any job she could find. She cleaned houses, worked late shifts at local restaurants, and even did odd jobs for neighbors, all while trying to hide her growing belly. She couldn't afford to stop, not with the constant threats looming over her. But her body, worn and weary, had other plans. One night, while scrubbing floors in a small local shop, her vision blurred. She tried to shake it off, but the world around her began to spin. She felt herself sway and clung to the counter to stabilize herself, but it was in vain. The last thing she remembered was the cold tile floor rushing up before everything went black. When Anna regained consciousness, she was lying in a hospital bed, a nurse checking her vital signs. Her heart raced with panic as her hands instinctively went to her belly. The nurse, noticing her distress, placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Your babies are fine," she said softly, "but you're pushing yourself too hard. You need to rest." Rest. The word felt like a cruel joke. How could she rest when her entire life was falling apart? But the nurse's words echoed in her mind. Anna knew she had to be careful. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her children. With no other choice, Anna reduced her work hours, which only made things worse. The bills piled up faster than she could pay them, and the threats from the lenders became more intense. She tried to sell whatever little she had of value, but it barely made a dent. Every penny she earned seemed to disappear into the void of debt, leaving her with nothing. The stress became unbearable. There were nights she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she would survive one more day. Dark thoughts filled her mind, doubts seeping in like shadows in the night. She felt trapped, as if she were suffocating under the weight of her situation. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered her babies. They were all she had left of John, and even though he had left her with this mess, she couldn't abandon them. They were her light in the darkness, the only reason she kept going. By the time her twins were born, Anna was exhausted. She held them in her arms, their tiny fingers clinging to hers, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself a moment of peace. In that hospital room, surrounded by silence, she made a promise. No matter what, she would protect them. She would find a way to survive, even if it meant sacrificing every part of herself. But reality waited outside those hospital doors. The world hadn't changed while she was in the hospital. The lenders were still there, waiting for their payment, and now, with 2 mouths to feed, Anna's situation was even more desperate. The fear, once a low hum in the background, became a constant roar in her ears. The weeks turned into months, and Anna's life continued in a blur of sleepless nights and exhausting days. Her twins, now crawling and laughing, were the only bright spots in her grim existence. But every smile, every giggle, was tinged with the ever-present threat that hung over their heads. It wasn't until one particularly bad day, when the phone rang again with another demand for payment, that Anna realized something had to change. She couldn't go on like this, living in fear, waiting for the next knock on the door. She needed a way out. And when the opportunity finally came, it wasn't in the form of a lifeline, but rather a chance to work on a luxury cruise ship, a job that, though tough, promised enough money to pay off the debt that had haunted her for years. It was her only option, and without hesitation, she took it. 9 years had passed, but the weight on Anna's shoulders hadn't lessened. If anything, it had grown heavier. The twins, Diego and Lucia, now 9 years old, had bright, lively eyes, completely unaware of the danger that always seemed to lurk in the background. Anna had done her best to shield them from the harsh reality of their situation, but each day felt like a battle she wasn't sure she could win. Despite working tirelessly at multiple jobs, Anna had barely made a dent in the debt. The lenders were as relentless as ever, showing up at her door or calling her whenever she fell behind on a payment, which seemed to happen more often than not. The threats became darker, their patience wearing thin. There were moments she feared for her life, and worse, for the safety of her children. Anna knew she couldn't continue living like this. She was worn out, her body exhausted from years of overwork, and the constant fear was beginning to take its toll on her mind. The kids noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. But she couldn't let them know the truth. To them, their mother was strong, always holding everything together, even when she felt like her world was crumbling. One night, after a long shift at the cafeteria, Anna sat in her small apartment, going over the bills scattered across the table. Her hands trembled as she looked at the numbers that didn't add up. There was enough for rent, but that was it. There wouldn't be money for food, let alone the next payment to the lenders. A knock on the door startled her. She knew who it was before she even opened it. Her heart raced, fear coiling in her chest as she cracked the door open. It was one of the men who worked for the lenders, a burly figure with cold eyes that never softened, no matter how much she pleaded for more time. He was the face she had come to dread, a reminder that the clock was ticking. "You're late again," he said, his voice flat, as if they were discussing something as mundane as the weather. "I just need a little more time," Anna replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I swear I'll have the money soon." His expression didn't change. "You've been saying that for years, Anna." "The boss is tired of waiting." Anna's throat tightened. She knew what that meant. She had heard stories of people who crossed these men, people who were never seen again. She had always managed to scrape by, always found a way to make just enough to keep them at bay, but she was running out of options. "I have a job lined up," she said quickly, hoping to buy more time. "I start in a few days. It's a good job. I'll be able to pay everything, I promise." The man raised an eyebrow, finally showing a flicker of interest. "A job? Doing what?" Anna swallowed hard, her palms sweaty. "On a yacht. A luxury cruise. I'll be working as a maid." For the first time, the man seemed to consider her words. "A cruise, huh? That might work. But you better make sure it does, or we'll come collecting, and it won't just be money we take." The implication hung heavily in the air. Anna nodded quickly, her pulse pounding in her ears. She watched as the man turned and left, her entire body trembling once the door closed. The relief was temporary, but it was enough. The job on the cruise had been her lifeline, the only chance she had to get out of this crushing debt. If she could save enough during her time at sea, she could finally put an end to this nightmare. The following days were a blur of preparations. Anna arranged for her neighbor, an elderly lady named Donna Carmen, to look after the twins while she was away. It broke her heart to leave them, but this was her only chance to secure a future for them. She had no other option. The day she left, Diego and Lucia clung to her, their small arms wrapping around her tightly, as if sensing how hard it was for her to leave. "Will you come back, Mom?" Diego asked, his brown eyes filled with worry. "In a few weeks," Anna replied, kneeling down to hug them tightly. "And when I come back, things are going to be better, I promise." Lucia, always the quieter of the two, simply nodded and buried her face in Anna's neck. The lump in Anna's throat grew as she walked away, kissing their foreheads before handing them over to Dona Carmen. As she boarded the yacht, the enormity of what she was doing began to sink in. This cruise was supposed to be her salvation, but as the massive ship loomed above her, a sense of dread filled her chest. She hadn't been away from the twins for this long since they were born, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. The yacht itself was a floating palace, gleaming white against the blue of the ocean. The guests, dressed in designer clothes, strolled around the deck, laughing and sipping champagne, completely oblivious to the struggles of people like Anna. She donned her uniform and took her place among the staff, her mind focused on the money she desperately needed to earn. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. She worked long hours, her feet aching at the end of each shift, but it was a small price to pay for the money she was making. She kept to herself, avoiding conversations with the rest of the staff, her mind always on her children, her debt, and the future she was trying to build. But then, on the fourth day, while carrying a tray of drinks to a table in the high-end restaurant, her world tilted on its axis. There, sitting at one of the tables, dressed in a pristine suit, was John. Anna froze in place, her heart hammering in her chest as she stared at the man sitting at the table. For a moment, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. It couldn't be him. It just couldn't be. John had been dead for 9 years. He had left her to pick up the pieces, to raise their children, and to fight against the mountain of debts that nearly swallowed her whole. But there he was, alive, and more than alive. He looked polished, his hair carefully styled, his suit crisp and expensive, and he sat with a casual confidence that made Anna's stomach churn. And beside him was a woman, beautiful, with dark hair and a smile that radiated warmth. She laughed softly at something John had said, her hand resting gently on his. Anna's grip on the tray tightened, her knuckles white, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. How could this be happening? Her knees felt weak, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse right there, in the middle of the restaurant. "Anna, the table." A voice snapped her out of her stupor, one of the more experienced service staff gently pushing her towards another group of guests waiting for their drinks. With trembling hands, she managed to deliver the drinks, her thoughts spiraling. She couldn't confront him here, not now. But how could she not? She needed answers. The man who had disappeared from her life, the man whose body had never been found, was sitting a few meters away from her, alive and well. What did that mean? Had he been hiding all this time? Why had he left her? As soon as her shift was over, Anna hurried back to her small cabin, her pulse racing, her hands trembling as she tried to process what she had just seen. John, he had been there, sitting as if everything was normal, as if he hadn't shattered her entire world. Her head swam with questions, none of them with answers, and yet, one thing became clear. She had to confront him. She had to know the truth. Later that night, she walked the deck, waiting for the restaurant to close, rehearsing what she would say. But when the time came, when she finally saw him walking out with that same woman on his arm, all the rehearsed words disappeared. Instead, it was pure instinct that drove her feet forward, her heart pounding in her ears as she stepped in his path. "John." Her voice came out just above a whisper, but it was enough. He stopped in his tracks, his body tensing as he turned to face her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe even guilt. But as quickly as it came, it was gone. He blinked, his face hardening into a mask of indifference. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" he asked, his voice cold, distant. Anna's blood froze. He was pretending. He was standing right in front of her, alive, and he was pretending he didn't even know her. Her jaw clenched as anger flared inside her. 7 years of pain and confusion came rushing to the surface, and she felt the weight of each moment crash down on her. "You know who I am," she hissed, stepping closer, her eyes burning with a mix of rage and disbelief. Don't you dare pretend you don't. The woman at his side looked confused, glancing between them. John, what is this? Who is she? John let out a sigh, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Anna. You must be mistaken, he said coldly. I don't know you. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have dinner reservations. He began to turn, but Anna wasn't going to let him get away that easily. She grabbed his arm, pulling him to face her. The woman at his side gasped and John's eyes darkened, his calm facade slipping for a moment. How could you do this? Anna's voice cracked as she spoke. How could you leave me? I thought you were dead. I had to raise our children alone. I had to face everything you left behind. And you've just been living this life with her? John's jaw tensed, and for a second Anna thought she saw regret flicker in his eyes. But then, he pulled his arm from her grip, his face hardening. You don't know what you're talking about, he said coldly. And if you don't leave us alone, I'll call security. Anna watched him, her heart breaking anew. She wanted to scream, to cry, to shake him until he admitted the truth. But something in his voice, something in his posture, told her that wasn't going to happen tonight. He wasn't going to admit anything, not here. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she stepped back. The woman at John's side grabbed his arm, pulling him closer, as if to protect him from whatever chaos Anna had brought to their evening. But Anna wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Fine, she said, her voice low but firm. You can keep pretending all you want, but I know the truth and I'm not going to let you get away with it. John's eyes locked on hers for a long moment, the tension thick between them. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, the woman on his arm. Anna watched them disappear into the crowd, her chest tight with a mix of fury and devastation. She stood there, alone on the deck, the sound of the waves crashing against the ship echoing in her ears. The John she once knew, the man she loved, the father of her children, was gone. In his place was a stranger, someone who had faked his own death and left her to pick up the pieces. But Anna wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. Not after everything he had put her through. She had come so far, survived so long, and she wasn't about to give up now. The following days on the cruise passed in a blur. Anna moved through her shifts like a ghost, her mind spinning with thoughts of John. Every time she replayed that moment on the deck, a mix of fury and heartbreak coursed through her. How could he have left her? How could he have left their children, faked his own death, and built a new life with that woman? She wasn't sure who she was angrier at, him for abandoning her and the twins, or herself for still feeling that longing, that hollow in her chest where his love used to be. Each day she saw him on the ship, laughing with his new partner, living in a world so far removed from the life they once shared. And each time she saw him, the wound sank deeper. She needed answers, and soon. Late one night, when her shift finally ended, Anna made a decision. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed to confront him again, away from the curious eyes of the guests, away from the woman who clung to his arm as if he was the center of her universe. Anna knew where he was staying. She had seen the suite assignments when she started, and now, standing in the dimly lit hallway outside his door, she felt her heart race with anticipation and fear. With a deep breath, she knocked on the door. There was a long silence, and for a moment Anna thought he might not answer. Maybe he was asleep, or maybe he was ignoring her, hoping she would just go away. But then the door opened, and there he was. John stood in the threshold, his face inscrutable, the same carefully constructed mask of indifference he had worn the first night they saw each other. "What do you want, Anna?" His voice was flat, almost bored. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I want the truth, John. I at least deserve that." He sighed and stepped aside, indicating for her to enter. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of what she was about to hear pressing down on her. But then she stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her. The suite was opulent, a far cry from the cramped quarters where she stayed with the rest of the staff. The living room was large, with luxurious furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the ocean, the moonlight casting a silvery glow over the room. It was the kind of life John had always wanted. Luxury, ease, no responsibilities weighing him down. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, her arms crossed, as if to protect herself from the emotional onslaught she knew was coming. John walked to the window, staring out at the vast sea for a long moment, the only sound the soft hum of the ship's engines and the rhythmic crash of the waves. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and resigned. "I didn't plan it, you know." Anna clenched her fists. "Didn't plan what? Leaving me? Leaving your children? Faking your death?" He turned to face her, his expression softening just a bit. "I didn't plan for it to happen like this, but things got complicated. Complicated." Anna's voice rose, her frustration bubbling. "John, you disappeared. I thought you were dead. We had a funeral for you. I raised our children alone, thinking you were gone, and all this time. What? Running away? Living this other life?" He flinched at her words, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I was in a mess, Anna. I owed more money than you can imagine. Those debts weren't going to disappear. I didn't know how to handle it. So when the opportunity came up, when that accident happened, I took it." Anna felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "You took it? You mean you saw a chance to disappear and you just left us?" He nodded, a deep sadness in his eyes that did nothing to soothe her anger. "Yes. I thought it was the only way. I thought if I faked my death, I could escape the debt, start over. And you didn't think about us?" Anna's voice trembled. "You didn't think about how we would survive, about your children?" "I did," John said, his voice breaking slightly. "I thought about it every day, but I saw no way out, Anna. I was scared. I was in so deep, and the pressure was crushing me. So I left." Anna shook her head, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You left us to deal with the mess you created. Do you know what I've been through, what I've had to do to keep our children safe, to pay off the debts you left?" He looked down at the floor. "I know, and I'm sorry." "You're sorry?" Anna's laugh was bitter, filled with years of pent-up pain. "Is that all you have to say? That you're sorry?" John ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "What do you want me to say, Anna? I messed up. I made a mistake, but I can't change the past." She stared at him, her mind spinning. She had spent years imagining what this moment would be like, what she would say if she ever saw him again. But now that she was here, all she felt was an overwhelming sense of betrayal. And what about her? Anna gestured towards the door, referring to the woman with whom he had been. John hesitated, and that was all Anna needed to know. "I see," she whispered, her heart sinking. "I didn't want it to happen like this," he said softly, but the words felt empty. Anna stood there, looking at the man she once loved, the father of her children, and realized that the John she had known was gone. He had been replaced by someone who made choices that shattered their lives. She took a deep breath, her voice firm despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "You may have escaped your debt, John, but you won't escape this. I'm not going to let you walk away from what you did." And with that, she turned and left the suite, leaving John alone, his reflection lost in the glass. Back in her small cabin, Anna sat on the edge of the tiny bed, her mind racing with the conversation that had just unfolded. The truth had come out. John had left her and their children, he had faked his death, and now he was living a life of luxury with a woman who probably had no idea of the disaster he had left behind. Her heart still pounded hard in her chest, her hands shaking from the confrontation, but now that the shock had passed, something new began to take root: determination. She had spent years fighting to survive, working herself to exhaustion for the twins, all while carrying the weight of John's betrayal. She had sacrificed everything, and yet, here he was, walking away from his responsibilities as if none of this had happened. It wasn't fair, and she wasn't going to let him get away with it. John had always been good at hiding his true self. He could charm anyone, make them believe he was someone trustworthy, but Anna knew the truth now, and with the truth came power. She had something he didn't expect: knowledge. She knew what he had done, how he had abandoned them, and worst of all, he had done it to escape a debt that was now crushing her and threatening the safety of her children. For the first time in years, Anna felt a surge of control. She was no longer the victim. She wasn't going to let John's decisions dictate her life. It was time to fight back. The next morning, she wasted no time. Her first step was to gather as much information as she could. She started with the passenger records of the ship, easily accessible to staff members who needed to know the identities of the passengers. There, in black and white, was John's new identity. He had changed his last name, adopted a new persona, but to Anna, he was still the man who had destroyed everything. Then, she took a quiet moment in the staff break room to dig deeper into his companion. The woman, named Claudia, had booked the cruise as part of a luxury getaway. She and John were listed as husband and wife. It sickened her to think of the life they had built on lies. Anna knew she couldn't confront John head-on again, not without a plan. Her years dealing with the lenders had taught her that surviving wasn't just about strength. It was about strategy. She needed to be smart about this. If she went to the authorities, she would need evidence, and if she wanted the lenders, she needed to make sure they wouldn't come after her or the twins. That night, after her shift, she headed to the ship's communications center. She had a contact who could help her, an old acquaintance from her neighborhood who had worked in investigations for years. He wasn't exactly on the right side of the law, but that didn't matter to Anna. She needed someone who could dig up dirt on John, and fast. She sent a discreet message detailing what she had discovered about John, his new identity, and the life he had been living. She asked for any information that could tie him back to his old debts or, better yet, any evidence of illegal activities he had been involved in. It didn't take long to get a response from her contact, a reply that made her blood run cold. John hadn't just been running from a debt. He had been involved in a massive scam, one that had targeted a wealthy businessman in their hometown. The plan had been simple: fake his death, disappear, and let Anna deal with the consequences. He had drained their accounts before disappearing, leaving her with nothing. But there was more. Her contact provided documents, bank transfers, fraudulent contracts, even emails between John and his accomplices. The evidence was damning. If Anna brought this to the authorities, John would face not just the debt collectors, but time in prison. Her hand trembled as she reviewed the files, the weight of what she held sinking in. This was it. This was how she was going to take back her life. With these documents, she could not only free herself from the debt, but she could also ensure that John paid for everything he had done. But there was still the matter of the lenders. Anna knew that if she didn't handle things carefully, they could come after her once John was out of the picture. They had proven how ruthless they could be, and she couldn't risk putting her children in further danger. She needed a way to involve them without becoming their next target. The answer came in a moment of clarity. If she handed John over to the lenders before going to the authorities, she could use his debt to her advantage. She could negotiate her own safety in exchange for handing over John. After all, they didn't care who paid, as long as they got their money. It was risky, but it was the only plan that made sense. She couldn't trust that the authorities would handle this quickly enough. The lenders had connections, and if anyone could track down John and make him face the consequences, it was them. With the evidence in hand, Anna felt a new sense of purpose. She was no longer the same woman she had been 9 years ago, broken and scared. She was stronger now, tougher, and she wasn't going to let John destroy her life any longer. She made the call. The call was brief and direct. Anna explained her situation to the lenders, choosing her words carefully to make it clear that she was not their enemy. She wasn't running away. In fact, she was handing them something much more valuable than money. John had gotten away with his deception for too long, and it was time for him to face the consequences. The man on the other end of the line, someone she had only dealt with through intermediaries before, listened quietly, his voice low and cold, just as she expected. But when she mentioned John and the evidence she had, there was a pause. "Are you telling me you can hand us the man who owes us millions?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "Yes," Anna replied, her voice firm despite the fear tingling at the back of her neck. "I have proof of where he is, the crimes he committed, and how he's been living under a new identity. I can give you everything you need to find him." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Anna could almost hear the gears turning as he processed her offer. She knew she was playing with fire, but this was her only option. If she didn't handle this perfectly, she could end up on the wrong side of their wrath. Or worse, they could turn their attention to her children. Finally, the man spoke again. "And what do you want in return?" "My safety," she said, her voice unbreakable. "I've been paying his debt for years. I want that debt wiped clean, and I want to make sure my children and I are left alone once and for all. You get John and all the money he owes you, but I walk away clean. No more threats, no more visits. Another pause. Anna's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for his response, praying this was the right move. She couldn't afford for this to go wrong. Okay, he finally said, his voice colder than before. But if you're lying, if this is some kind of trick, you'll regret it. I'm not lying, Anna said quickly, her voice steady. I'll send the documents tonight. You'll see for yourself that it's all real. He said nothing more before hanging up, leaving Anna alone with the weight of what she had just set in motion. She looked at her phone, her hands trembling. It was done. She had made the call. Now there was no turning back. That night, she gathered all the evidence her contact had sent her. The bank records, the emails, the fraudulent contracts, and she packaged it in a secure file. She sent everything to the lenders, along with details of John's location on the ship and his new identity. It was all there, undeniable and irrefutable. Once the message was sent, Anna collapsed on her bed, her body heavy with exhaustion, the weight of the past few days finally catching up to her. But there was a strange sense of relief in knowing she had taken action. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. The next morning, Anna went about her duties on the ship as usual, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. She tried to keep her head down, blending in with the other staff members, but every time she passed a group of security personnel or saw a guest she didn't recognize, her heart skipped a beat. The waiting was the hardest part. Hours passed, and still nothing happened. Anna began to wonder if the lenders had received her message, if they were planning anything, or if she had miscalculated entirely. Doubt gnawed at the edges of her resolve, and she found herself checking her phone obsessively, waiting for some kind of sign that her plan had worked. Then, just after noon, she noticed something. There was a sudden surge of activity near the main deck. Security guards moved discreetly among the crowd, and she saw one of the senior officers heading towards the VIP suites where John was staying. Her pulse quickened. This was it. Anna followed at a distance, careful to stay out of sight. She watched as the security team reached John's suite and knocked on the door. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. Then, the door opened and two guards went inside. She couldn't see John's face, but she imagined the surprise, the panic that must have overtaken him when they told him his time was up. Moments later, John came out, flanked by the security officers, his expression a mix of confusion and anger. But as they escorted him through the ship, Anna saw the flash of recognition in his eyes. He knew. He knew this was her doing. He didn't fight, didn't try to run, just walked with them, his head held high, as if he still had some control over the situation. But Anna knew better. His lies, his betrayal, had finally caught up with him. As they took him off the ship, Anna stayed hidden, watching from a distance, her breath caught in her throat as the reality of it all sank in. John was gone, and with him, the crushing weight of the past 9 years began to lift. The debt, the fear, the endless struggle to survive, it was all over. She had done it. She had taken back control of her life. But even as a sense of relief washed over her, Anna knew this wasn't the end. There were still pieces to pick up, wounds to heal, and there was still the matter of John's accomplices, like Claudia, who had played her own part in the deception. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of victory. The hardest part was behind her, and no matter what came next, Anna knew she had the strength to face it. Anna watched from the shadows as John was led away from the ship, his head held high, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the strain in his posture. He was trying to maintain control, to keep up appearances, but there was no escaping what was coming. She felt a strange mix of emotions as she watched him. Relief, satisfaction, and even a small, bitter twinge of sadness for the man she once loved, the man she thought she knew. But that man was gone. In his place was someone who had betrayed her, had abandoned their children, and had created a life of lies. As the security team escorted him to a car waiting at the dock, Anna knew it was only a matter of time before the lenders made their move. She had no illusions about what they would do once they had him. John had dug his own grave, and now he was going to lie in it. But there was still one loose end, Claudia. Anna had seen her with John on the ship, laughing, carefree, completely unaware of the storm that was about to descend. Claudia wasn't just an innocent bystander. She had been part of John's life for years, and Anna suspected she knew more than she let on. There was no way John could have faked his disappearance without help, and Anna was certain Claudia had played a role. After John was taken away, Anna decided it was time for one last confrontation. She needed answers. She needed to know just how involved Claudia was. The cruise wasn't over, and Claudia was still on board, oblivious to the chaos that was about to hit her. Anna waited until later that night, when most of the guests had retired to their suites or were enjoying the evening entertainment. The hallways of the ship were quiet, the soft hum of the engines the only sound as Anna made her way to Claudia's suite, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. She had waited for this moment for years, and now it was finally here. She knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it opened. Claudia was there, dressed in an elegant silk robe, her face wrinkling in confusion as she recognized Anna. "Can I help you?" Claudia asked, her voice smooth, polished, as if she didn't have a care in the world. Anna forced a smile. "We need to talk." Claudia glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to see if there was anyone else around, then turned back to Anna with a small, condescending smile. "About what exactly?" "About John," Anna said, stepping forward, her voice low and firm. "About what he's done, about what you've been a part of." Claudia's smile faded, replaced by a slight narrowing of her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb," Anna snapped, her frustration bubbling over. "You've been with him for years. You've lived off the money he's stolen, from the life he's built on lies. You know exactly what I'm talking about." Claudia's expression changed, the mask of indifference slipping slightly. "Look, whatever issues you have with John, that's between you two. I don't know anything about his past." "Liar," Anna said, stepping closer, her voice sharp as a knife. "You've known all along. You helped him disappear. You knew he left me, left his children with nothing. You knew and you didn't care." Claudia's eyes flickered with something. Guilt, fear, or maybe just annoyance. She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe, her tone sharp. "I didn't know the whole story, okay? He told me you were out of the picture, that he had no choice but to leave. I didn't ask questions. We were happy." "Happy," Anna repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. "Happy while I struggled to feed our children, while I was threatened, harassed, forced to pay his debts?" Claudia's face paled slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "I didn't know it was that bad." "Didn't know or didn't care?" Anna retorted, her eyes blazing with fury. "You were too busy living in luxury to bother finding out what happened to the life he left behind." Claudia flinched, her confidence wavering for the first time. She shifted nervously, looking around as if searching for an escape from the conversation. "Look, I'm sorry for what happened to you, but John made his own choices. I'm not responsible for that." "You were complicit," Anna said, her voice firm, the anger boiling just beneath the surface. "You helped him live a lie, and now he's paying the price for it. But don't think you're getting off easy either." Claudia's eyes widened, alarmed. "What do you mean?" "I've turned everything over to the authorities," Anna continued, her tone cold and calculated. "All the evidence, John's debts, his fraud, every lie he told. They know about him, and they know about you. It's only a matter of time before they come for you too." Claudia's breath hitched, her hands clutching the edge of the door as panic crossed her face. "You can't be serious. I didn't do anything wrong. You let him destroy my life," Anna said, her voice trembling with the weight of years of betrayal. "And you stood by and watched him do it. So yes, I'm serious, and believe me, you won't be able to hide behind John anymore." For a moment, Claudia remained silent, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for a way out of this nightmare. She looked at Anna, and for the first time, there was no arrogance, no disdain, just fear. "You're making a mistake," she whispered, her voice shaky. Anna shook her head, her gaze steady. "No, the only mistake I made was trusting John. But that's over now, and so is this." Without another word, Anna turned and walked away, leaving Claudia alone in the doorway, her face pale and her body frozen in place. As Anna made her way back to her cabin, the weight of everything she had done finally began to lift. John was gone, and soon Claudia would be too. The past that had haunted her for years was finally coming to an end, and for the first time in a long time, Anna felt free. The next morning, Anna woke to the sound of the ship's engines humming softly beneath her cabin. The events of the previous night felt distant, like a dream, but the reality set in quickly. John had been taken off the ship. Claudia was probably in a state of panic, realizing that her comfortable life was about to crumble, and Anna was finally free from the weight that had suffocated her for so many years. The tension that had gripped her for so long began to ease, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she breathed deeply without the fear gnawing at her from the inside. She had done it. She had taken control of her life, faced the man who had left her broken, and delivered him to face justice. It wasn't the kind of closure she had imagined, but it was the closure she needed. As she prepared for the day, a soft knock on her door made her pause. Her heart gave a lurch and her mind filled with all the possible scenarios. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was no longer afraid. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. To her surprise, it wasn't a crew member or a debt collector. It was the security officer from the ship, the same one she had seen escorting John off the ship. "Ms. Martinez," he asked, his expression serious but not unkind. "Yes, that's me," Anna replied, a hint of anxiety creeping into her voice despite her newfound strength. "I thought you might like to know," he began, adjusting his cap, "that the man you identified as John Martinez was taken into custody without incident. He's being transported to local authorities and, from what I understand, will face criminal charges. There's quite a bit of evidence against him." Anna nodded, her pulse quickening. "Thank you for letting me know. I wasn't sure what would happen after he was taken off the ship." The officer gave her a small, understanding smile. "I've seen a lot of things in my time, but people like him never get away with it forever. It was only a matter of time. You did the right thing by coming forward." She hadn't expected the rush of emotions that hit her at his words. It wasn't relief or even satisfaction. It was exhaustion, the kind that sets in after years of fighting, of holding everything together for so long. Her knees felt weak, and for a moment she had to lean against the doorframe. The officer noticed. "Are you okay, Ms. Martinez?" Anna nodded, forcing a smile. "I will be. It's just been a lot." The officer tipped his hat, his expression softening. "I can imagine. Take care. Okay? You've been through a lot." She thanked him, closing the door softly behind him. As she leaned against it, the enormity of everything settled on her like a heavy blanket. John would finally pay for what he had done. For leaving her to carry the debt, for faking his death and living a life of lies. It was over. And yet, as the minutes passed, a strange sense of emptiness lingered where her anger had burned so fiercely. She had spent years driven by betrayal, by the need to protect her children and survive. Now, with that burden lifted, she wasn't sure what came next. After a few moments, Anna walked to the window of her small cabin and looked out at the vast ocean. The sunlight danced on the waves, the horizon stretching infinitely before her. It was beautiful, peaceful even, but it was also a reminder that her journey wasn't over yet. She had fought so hard to survive, and now she needed to figure out how to live again. Her thoughts turned to Diego and Lucia, the reason she had kept going all these years. They had been her light in the darkest times, her reason to wake up each day and push forward, no matter how impossible it seemed. And now she had the chance to give them the life they deserved, free from fear, free from debt, free from the ghost of their father's betrayal. It was time to go home. When the ship docked at the bustling port city later that day, Anna gathered her few belongings and headed to the gangway. The noise of the port was overwhelming. The shouts of dock workers, the roar of trucks, the clatter of luggage being unloaded. But for Anna, it all faded into the background. Her focus was on getting back to her children. She had arranged for Donna Carmen to pick her up at the port and take her back home. The thought of seeing her children again filled her with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, She was returning to them without the weight of fear and uncertainty hanging over her. As she stepped off the ship, she saw the familiar old car of Dona Carmen waiting near the curb. The elderly woman waved from the driver's seat, a smile spreading across her wrinkled face as Anna approached. Anna's heart swelled with gratitude. Dona Carmen had been her rock during the darkest times, helping her take care of the twins when things seemed impossible. "Welcome back, dear," Dona Carmen said warmly as Anna climbed into the passenger seat. "How was the trip?" Anna paused for a moment, her gaze wandering out the window as the city passed by quickly. "It was eventful," she finally said, a small smile playing on her lips. "But it's over now, all of it." Dona Carmen patted her hand gently. "I'm glad to hear that. The twins will be so happy to see you. They've been talking about you non-stop since you left." A lump formed in Anna's throat as she thought of her children. "I've missed them so much." The rest of the ride passed in comfortable silence, and soon they arrived at the small apartment building Anna called home. As she got out of the car, her heart beat with anticipation. Diego and Lucia would be waiting inside, their faces lighting up the moment they saw her. She couldn't wait to hug them, to tell them everything was going to be all right. For the first time in 9 years, she finally believed it. Anna stepped out of the car and walked towards the brick facade of the apartment building, the familiar sight, a welcome one. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stairs, her mind filled with thoughts of Diego and Lucia. Years of struggle, of sleepless nights and endless worries had led her to this moment. She was coming home, truly coming home this time, with the knowledge that the past no longer had a hold on her. Reaching her apartment door, she could already hear the soft sound of laughter coming from inside. She smiled, her hand hovering over the doorknob for a moment, savoring the anticipation. Then, with a deep breath, she opened the door. The sight that greeted her made her heart swell. Diego and Lucia were sitting on the floor with Dona Carmen, surrounded by a tangle of toys and coloring books. The twins looked up simultaneously, their eyes lighting up with excitement the moment they saw her. "Mommy!" Diego shouted, jumping to his feet and running towards her. Lucia wasn't far behind, her face glowing with joy. Anna dropped to her knees, her arms open, as the twins rushed into them, nearly knocking her over with the force of their hugs. She wrapped her arms around them, pulling them close, her heart aching with a mix of happiness and relief. For so long she had dreamed of this moment, of having them without the weight of fear pressing on her. "I missed you so much," she whispered, her voice laden with emotion as she kissed the tops of their heads. "We missed you too, Mommy," Lucia chimed in, her small hands gripping Anna's shirt tightly, as if fearing she might disappear again. Dona Carmen slowly stood up, stretching her stiff back before giving Anna a warm smile. "They've been asking about you every day. They'll be happy to know you're back for good now." Anna nodded, still hugging her children. "Thank you, Dona Carmen. I don't know what I would have done without you." The elderly woman waved her hand dismissively, though her eyes twinkled with affection. "Nonsense. I'm glad you're okay. That's what matters." Anna smiled, but there was a weight to her expression that Dona Carmen seemed to notice. The elderly woman walked over to Anna and patted her shoulder gently. "Well, I'll leave you to your reunion. You've earned some time with these little ones." With that, Dona Carmen gathered her things and headed towards the door, stopping only once to give Anna one last gesture of encouragement. "You're a strong woman, Anna, stronger than most. Never forget that." As the door closed behind her, Anna sat back on the floor with Diego and Lucia, letting herself get lost in the sound of their laughter and the warmth of their hugs. For the first time in years, she felt like she could finally breathe, as if the crushing weight that had been on her chest was lifting. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, playing with toys, coloring, and sharing stories. Anna watched her children with a kind of awe, realizing how much she had missed during the years she had spent struggling to keep them afloat. She had been so consumed with survival, with debt and fear, that she had missed these little moments, the moments that really mattered. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the evening sky turned shades of pink and orange, Anna tucked Diego and Lucia into bed. Both were exhausted, their eyes drooping as she read their favorite bedtime story. Lucia snuggled under her blanket, clutching her bunny plushie, while Diego lay beside her, his eyes barely open as he listened to his mother's soft voice. "Are you going to stay home this time, Mommy?" Diego asked sleepily, his small voice cutting through the quiet. Anna's heart clenched at the question. She leaned over and kissed his forehead gently. "Yes, honey, I'm home for good. No more leaving." "Good," Diego murmured, his eyes closing as he drifted off to sleep. Lucia was already asleep, her soft snores filling the room. Anna stayed there for a moment, watching her children, her heart swollen with love and a deep sense of peace. They were safe. They were finally safe. As she quietly exited the room and closed the door behind her, Anna walked into the living room and sank into the worn-out couch. The apartment was small and modest, but it was home. It was hers, and for the first time in years, Anna didn't feel like a prisoner in her own life. She was free. Free to start over. Free to build a new future for herself and her children. But the weight of the past still lingered at the edges of her mind. John was gone, but the memories of his betrayal, the years of struggle, weren't something she could just forget. She had survived, yes, but now she had to figure out how to live again, how to rebuild her life without the constant fear of what lurked around the corner. She knew it wouldn't be easy, the scars were deep, and there were still tough days ahead. But as she sat there, surrounded by the soft hum of the apartment, Anna felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She didn't have all the answers yet, but for now, that was enough. In the days that followed, Anna settled into a new rhythm. Life was still far from easy. There were bills to pay, groceries to buy, and the ever-present task of raising two energetic 9-year-olds on her own. But it felt different now, lighter somehow. No longer was there the constant shadow of John's betrayal hanging over her, no debt collectors knocking at her door, no fear of everything falling apart around her at any moment. For the first time, she could make decisions about her future and her children's future without the weight of the past pressing down on her. One evening, as she sat at the small kitchen table, Anna found herself reflecting on everything that had brought her to this point. John's arrest had made the news, his crimes laid bare for the world to see. He would face years in prison, maybe even a lifetime, depending on the full extent of his financial fraud. And Claudia? Anna wasn't sure where she ended up, but it no longer mattered. She had done her part. As she sipped her tea, a quiet sense of closure settled over her. The man who had caused her so much pain was no longer a part of her life. It was time to let him go, to start anew for real. The next day, Anna woke up early, the sunlight streaming through the curtains as the sounds of the city began to filter in. She could hear Diego and Lucia laughing in their room, and the sound brought a smile to her face. These moments, these simple, beautiful moments, were what mattered now. She had spent so many years just trying to survive that she had forgotten how to live. But now she had the chance to build something better for herself and her children, and she wasn't going to waste it. After breakfast, Anna took the twins to the nearby park. It was a bright, warm day, and the park was filled with families, couples, and children running across the grass. Diego and Lucia headed straight for the swings, their laughter echoing in the air as they played. Anna watched them, her heart swelling with a quiet, steady joy. She sat on a bench, letting the peace of the scene envelop her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, always on edge, ready for something to go wrong. There was no fear here, just the sound of her children laughing and the feel of the sun warming her skin. As she watched, Anna thought about all the lessons she had learned over the last 9 years. She had learned that strength wasn't just about surviving. It was about finding a way to move forward even when everything felt impossible. It was about fighting for what mattered, protecting the people you loved, even when you didn't have all the answers. And she had learned that sometimes letting go was the hardest but most necessary thing you could do. John had been a part of her life for so long, first as the man she loved, then as the man who betrayed her, and finally as the man she had defeated. But now he was gone, and she was free to build a new future, one that didn't involve the ghosts of her past. As the day wore on, Anna found herself thinking less and less about what had happened with John and more about the life she had ahead of her. There were so many possibilities now, so much to look forward to. She wasn't sure where life would take her next, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited to find out. Later that night, after tucking Diego and Lucia into bed, Anna stood by the window of her small apartment and looked out at the city. The lights twinkled in the distance, cars gently honking as the city buzzed with life. It was peaceful in its own way, a reminder that the world kept turning, no matter what had happened in the past. A sense of calm settled over her as she watched the city. For years, she had been waiting for the past to catch up with her, waiting for something to go wrong. But now there was nothing left to wait for. The past was behind her, and the future was hers to shape. As she moved away from the window and got ready for bed, a soft smile played on her lips. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was hers, and that, more than anything, was what mattered. For the first time in years, Anna fell asleep without the weight of worry pressing on her chest. She had won her freedom, not just from John, but from the fear and doubt that had held her back for so long. Now, finally, she could live, and for Anna, that was the greatest victory of all. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the story. Let us know in the comments where you are listening from today. I'm sure the next video appearing on your screen will also move you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. A big kiss and see you in the next story.